So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and it's been a while since we saw the Shire and Hobbiton, but that is where we are going to be today for what is, in effect, a lore-friendly battle, as the DUNEDAIN of Arnor have come to the aid of the Shire as they come under attack by a combined force of goblins and the foul creatures from the northern realm of Angmar. So this should be an interesting one. Hobbiton is a notoriously difficult settlement to defend, especially when you're outnumbered by an army, because of course Hobbiton doesn't have fortifications. You can be hit pretty much from a 360-degree arc all the way around the settlement. The only thing you really have that stops the enemy from doing that is the river at the front of Hobbiton, which somewhat stops the assault, but by the time they get across the river, honestly, most people won't hold out here anyway, so really all it does is block a very small section off from being advanced through. Other than that, you're going to have to defend every angle, and because you don't have fortifications or much in the way of sort of structures to get in the way of arrow fire, the enemy can also use artillery and missiles to their advantage as well. Not that it's all doom and gloom, you do have a substantial terrain advantage when you're fighting on the Shire, so as long as you're a faction that can take advantage of that with your own missiles, which both Arthedain and the Shire themselves are, you do go in with a decent chance. But the attackers, of course, are going to be bringing numbers to the field today, because we're going to have two Misty Mountains armies and an Angmar army, so they should be able to take good advantage of the space which is available to them. Starting off with the army over here, we have Kelvin.Lee. He's going to be playing as the Angmar force today. Do we have... I think it's two Goblin forces. Yes, it is. It's two Goblin forces. And Kelvin over here is going to be playing as the Northern Realm of Angmar, so heading up the assault, essentially, because in the packing order of evil, Angmar certainly ranks above the rabble that comes from the Misty Mountains and Moria. Got some Goblin Band. Obviously you don't need rams on this map, so he will drop those pretty quickly with both of his units of Goblin Band, which are very, very basic. They're pretty much the same sort of thing as the Orc Fodder over in Mordor, only you pay a little bit more for the Goblin Band, but to be fair, Angmar can get plenty of value elsewhere. It is a unit that needs to be sort of reduced in cost a little bit to be more in line with that, I think, to be worthwhile, because even if they are slightly higher damage, a unit like this is never really going to do much damage anyway. They're just going to be there to stand there and die. Ones that will be maybe a little bit more capable in melee will be the Angmar Marauders. They will still be outclassed by a vast amount of the units from Arthedain, and also they will be outdamaged actually by quite a lot of the things the Shire can bring to the table, the vicious little buggers that they are, but we'll get onto them when we get to the defenders. But the Angmar Marauders here for numbers, and that's a good thing because it means you can take advantage of the space on this map, like I said. I don't know how experienced Kelvin is with the game. It's not a name that I greatly recognise, but you know, with Angmar it's a nice, user-friendly faction. All you need to do is move forward, and your tankiness will generally take care of the rest as long as your allies are willing to move with you. Blackwatch Legion will be good for pushing through spots that the defenders have managed to fortify, so if you get to the top of the hill and you find yourself hitting a bit of a roadblock when it comes to the pikes in particular that Arthedain can bring to the table, the Blackwatch Legion are going to be one of the very best tools for getting yourself through that. The Cave Trolls as well, but the Cave Trolls are more just a single thing you can get behind lines because of how quickly they do it. The Blackwatch Legion can facilitate your whole army getting through enemy lines, which is obviously quite nice. Similar vein are the Gundabad Guard. Having said that, the Gundabad Guard, you don't see them pushing quite so much because they don't tend to do it as naturally. You need to sort of actually force path through in Shield Wall, but they're a very fine spear unit, especially for the Orc factions. They're reasonably tanky, as most of Angmar's mainline units are, especially when you compare them to the equivalent Goblin units. So yeah, they're going to be pretty good at staying alive, holding the line where a line is necessary. 2 units of them. He's got 2 units of Blackwatch Legion actually, which implies he's gone into the red limit. That is an interesting choice on a map like this, I have to say. We'll see if that proves to be worthwhile for him. He does have a unit of Guardians of Khan Doom as well. Doesn't have the armour upgrade today, but as line infantry goes, again, Angmar places a higher priority on having numbers and making those individual units as tanky as possible. They're not the most damaging unit of line infantry, but they will stay in the fight for substantially longer than a lot of the other Orcish line infantry units do. The Uruk-hai infantry, I think, are a bit more of a well-rounded unit, but the Guardians of Khan Doom are better in the defensive stakes because of their big shields. Trolls of Gundabad, so they of course can be really good at breaking up units. Got to be careful of the AP that will be coming their way, that any faction is going to have good access to, and I don't know where his general is. Ah, yes, I do. So he does have the Witches. I was wondering if he had brought them. That's where his general is, in and amongst the Goblin Band. From the front side of Hobbiton, we have Mason Bekerns, who is going to be playing as one of the 2 Goblin forces today. He's got some heavy Goblin crossbows, fantastic unit to bring as the Goblins because your other missile units are very underwhelming indeed. and this will give you the punch that you need, especially in a map where, generally speaking, the defenders are going to be exposed no matter what they do. So you're going to be able to lay down some good fire on something. Now, they can be skirmished down. You know, they have some armour. They're not the easiest thing to shoot down quickly, but you know, with the missile power that especially Arthedain tend to have, could be a bit of a problem for you if you don't use them correctly. But if you save them for later, if you wear the enemy down first and commit them a bit later on, there might be very little that the defenders are able to do about that because of how difficult Hobbiton can be to defend against an attack with strength and depth like that. Heavy Goblin Infantry, very basic unit of line infantry that's very similar to the Angmar Marauders we saw previously, and they'll do much the same job. They won't win any prizes for quality, but they will at the very least offer you some numbers to spread over the map. Got some Cave Troll Drummers and a couple of units of the standard Cave Trolls, so plenty of ability to punch through lines here with the Cave Trolls. We shall see if that comes to pass. More Heavy Goblin Infantry back here, a lot of Heavy Goblin Infantry. I like this pick. I like it when people, at least one of the attackers goes fully into the numbers, because especially on a map like this, if you use them correctly, it can be so difficult to deal with, and it can facilitate your allies doing well also. Goblin King's Bodyguard is where the General's going to be. Classic place to put the General, because they are, of course, the most survivable unit you have as the Misty Mountains. The Blackbacks are more spectacular in what they can achieve, but if you put the General in them, not only do you take away their ability to hide, but it's also a slightly more fragile unit to certain things. White Uruk Fearmongers, again, really good against the heavily armoured units. They'll be really useful against the Arthedain rank and file. As will the Mountain Uruk Coast, to be fair, a better unit of line infantry. The time will come one day when I can say they're a Dol Guldur unit, but that day seems to never come, does it? But yes, the Mountain Uruk Coast are here, and they should be able to roll forward. And in terms of the quality stakes, they will be able to outperform stuff like the Arthedain Man-at-Arms. And he has a catapult as well, which on a map like this, very good choice. And then finally, we have Stalin's Stepbro once again playing as another Misty Mountains army. So he must have a lot of hidden units, I would imagine, because this can't be his entire force. He's got 2 units of Heavy Goblin Crossbows, 3 units of Mountain Uruk Coast, 2 units of Black Uruks of the Mountains, a Swordmaster unit, so they'll be able to keep themselves alive much better than the vast majority of Misty Mountains units tend to be able to. And he also has got his General in a wise place, the Goblin King's Bodyguard. He has some drummers, and he also has the Drake Broodlings, which if they get rolling through the enemy lines, they can be a real nightmare, but they are quite a finicky unit. Sometimes they can be incredibly useful, other times they can be a complete waste. We'll see which it is today. I imagine Blackbacks are also on the menu for him. Now moving on to the defenders, the Dunedain of Arnor, or Arthedain as it were, played by Morris, who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. We got some chainmail faced individuals here. Probably want to cut some eye holes in those, my friend, but he's got some Arthedain Men-at-Arms with the first level of armour upgrade, so just the breastplate. That will help him on the front line, especially against the lower quality units. It'll give the Arthedain Men-at-Arms that extra edge they need to keep themselves alive. And of course, the pikes that Arthedain are so known for, again with the armour upgrade, very good at holding the line, especially against factions that don't have pikes that can respond to that. And Angmar do, but they haven't brought them. So as long as they keep their lines and manage to keep them safe from any shenanigans with trolls and with artillery, pikes could be a real saviour for Arthedain here. Some regular Arthedain Men-at-Arms as well, just with the mail coats. And that is pretty much that for this front line. He's got some Dunedain Troll Slayers again, pretty much a must bring, because they're so good in melee against most of the Orc factions. It's in the name, but they're also good against trolls, both in range and in melee. And their javelins, naturally, very, very potent. You want to shoot the right target though, you're going to be wasting this ammo really if you just plough it into a bunch of heavy goblins. Dunedain Peacekeepers, on the other hand, are fantastic at mopping up the lower tier units because of that extra melee defense they get from being Dunedain, combined with the fact they have higher damage from being a one-handed axe, so they aren't punished for having the axe as a weapon in the way that most units are, at least not as much. And so they can be really, really good against lightly armoured units. They're good just in general, like they can fight against heavily armoured units as well because of their quality, but the value you can get off of them when you go up against stuff like Heavy Goblin Infantry and Angmar Marauders is huge. But of course, they're a more high-profile target for the enemy to take down as well. Wardens of the North, armour-piercing bows, the Steel Bowmen alive and well. I remember once upon a time when they had 19 missile damage that was armour-piercing in the very earliest days of Reforged, but the Wardens of the North live on with their legacy, still one of the scarier units of regular archers in the game. Even if Rangers steal their thunder a little bit, hopefully that won't be for too much longer. He too has got a catapult, so it's looking pretty bad for Stalin's Stepbro and his Misty Mountains army, because Arthedain seems to have turned a lot of attention onto him, including the artillery and, perhaps more worryingly, the Rangers, which of course at this moment in time still are the body-piercing menace that we all know them as. And over here he's got some cavalry, he's got some Knights of Illuminas, potentially a devastating unit as well, obviously the tankiest unit of knights in the game overall. They do lack a little bit in terms of speed next to certain knights, and there are others which have other aspects, but depending on what you're looking for, this could be your favourite unit of knights. If you just want sheer tankiness, then they will deliver that. The Grey Company here, which are the mounted rangers, they will keep their body piercing. Less of a problem though, because they're obviously a mounted unit of cavalry. They've got to get closer, and they're more easily countered in a situation like this. Some dismounted Fornost Arine Knights, or Arane Knights. They're going to be here, obviously a very nice swordmaster unit, heavily armoured as well. Maybe not quite as heavily armoured as the Ravenhelms from Gondor, but very much the same sort of thing. Lots of base damage, lots of melee defense, and they will be able to carve their way through a lot of the enemy units. It looks like he's doing the sort of sword pose that Aragorn does, even if it is just catching it at the right time. More DUNEDAIN peacekeepers as well on this front line. I imagine we're probably going to start to get into more of the Shire's units as we move into the centre of the settlement. More Fornost Arane Knights. As here we go, the meme faction of the game played by Drip Merchant, the Hobbit folk. Tookish Hunters, very light unit of archers. So, they don't do a lot of damage, but they can trade reasonably with the enemy, to be honest with you, because of some shenanigans that the Hobbits have got going on. And ultimately, they're relatively cheap as well. The Band of Brass Archers, however, are the better version of them, of course, because they actually don a little bit of armour by Hobbit standards. And obviously they've got their armour piercing and melee as well, I believe, with their clubs, which that looks like they would take a Hobbit sort of 2 hands to wield, to be fair. Farmers of Buckland, which are they're the really high charge bonus version of this unit, the shock infantry that the Hobbits have. This is what I mean when I said the Hobbits were vicious. They've got a lot of armour piercing units which can punch well above their weight, rightly or wrongly, it's a debate that can be had. But Farmers of Buckland will be very useful, but they are fragile, so you have to commit them at the right time, otherwise they will just be overrun by the evil hordes. More Farmers of Buckland. They of course have some Ents, so the Ents from the wood that lies near the Shire have awakened and have decided to come to the aid of the little guys. Beornings as well. They've come quite a long way from the Vale of Anduin, but here they are nonetheless, so it'll be interesting to see what they do. Lots of cavalry presence actually from the defenders, but then this is a map where you don't actually have to actively choose to sally out because of how open it is. It's much easier to do so, especially when you don't have a 4th army which is coming at you from this side, which can often be a real problem. DUNEDAIN Trollslayers back here from Arthedain. We have got some more rangers, this time from the Hobbit folk, who I believe have got the Arnorian style as well, the Arthedain style I should say. I think the Cardland ones have got like a green coloration to them. Gandalf's Fireworks, which, to be fair, he could be in danger of getting a bit of friendly fire with this angle, but he will be peppering up Angmar on the approach. Proudfoot Protectors, which are pikes in melee, crossbows at range, so a nightmare to try and shut down. Definitely in terms of the actual Hobbit units, would be my pick for being by far the most effective. Battling Brandybucks, not quite as good as the Farmers of Buckland, but still the same sort of thing. They can punch above their weight because of the AP. Hobbitry in arms, just to form up what passes for a Hobbit front line. And finally some Sheriffs of the Farthings, which of course are technically Javelin Cavalry, anti-cavalry cavalry. But they throw pebbles, so very low damage, but to be fair, I don't really know what Angmar have got that can sort of stop them from doing that other than spraying them down with the Witches, which would be a bit of a waste. So anyway, regardless of that, without further ado, let's begin. And I would imagine first order of business is going to be the Arthedain wing, where the DUNEDAIN that have come to the aid of the beleaguered Shire are going to start opening up on the Misty Mountains army, which is approaching from the west. And they are going to shoot them down with the catapult first and foremost. This will probably convince this Misty Mountains player that he needs to start moving pretty quickly, and indeed those are some pretty decent hits there. Managing to hit the hidden goblin infantry that was in front and also doing a little bit of damage to the Black Orcs. He's actually moving backwards. I mean, I don't really know what this achieves. I mean, I guess he doesn't want to move in before his allies are set and ready, and I suppose that's fair enough. It's a decision that you can definitely choose to make. But I mean, you're gonna have to get pretty far away indeed before the catapult is out of range of you. Also some snow trolls that popped up there, of course a unit of trolls that can hide, and the best unit that the Misty Mountains have in sustained melee of trolls. But it is going to look also like we've got bit of a sally forth as well from the Sheriffs over on this side. Now the pebbles, I don't know how much damage you're necessarily going to do to Angmar. The ones that you could kill a fair number of the units of are stuff like the Snaga, but that's hardly worth killing really, because your infantry will do a lot of good damage here. What's going on there? We've got some dead Sheriffs, which implies they have got some missiles somewhere. Yeah, they do. They've got some Snaga archers, which are going to be able to return fire. Very, very low cost archer, this. But then they're only firing at hobbits. The hobbits not known for their armor craft. Not known for their durability. At least not in this way. So the sheriffs are going to try and utilise this. We've also seen the streaking of the artillery fire coming across here. They're going to be going for the Arthedainian front line, and they have managed to score a couple of hits. It's a relatively narrow band they're firing at, but if they do get a hit, it could be devastating. They've already killed off some pikemen, which is going to be a real concern here for the army of Stalin's Stepbro, who's going to have to move forward eventually. But clearly, what the attackers want to do first is soften the defenders up. So the defenders have to tread carefully, because if they take too many losses on a map like this, where they're already down an army, essentially, it's going to be tough for them. This, though, very, very careless, have to say, by the Hobbit player there, allowing his Sheriffs of the Farthings to get caught by lowly Goblin Band. Allowing Goblin Band, of all things, to get some value is a real sin. I'm not entirely sure what he intended to accomplish here, trying to delve deep into the lines of Angmar with a unit of very, very fragile cavalry indeed, and the outcome was inevitable, really, surrounded by Blackwatch Legion and trolls. Those poor hobbits, those poor sheriffs, were always going to get absolutely dumpstered. Meanwhile, there's a few dead bodies here, but no subsequent hits after the first volley. The Grey Company and the Knights of Anumnus offer a little bit more so than the sheriffs that are over on this side of things, who are still getting chased down by the Goblin Band, and they're going to get caught, honestly, if this player doesn't manage to get his act together and get his cavalry running away from the enemy. Just about managing to get away there. He's being forced... Ooh, yeah. I mean, he got away and then he came back. Came back for more. But yeah, I mean, he's having to use his pebbles on the Goblin Band, which are not a unit they would have been worried about in melee anyway. I think the Hobbitry and Arms would be able to defeat the Goblin Band 1-to-1. They really are just the garbage of Angmar. There's still 25 sheriffs. They could still be useful, but I think the fact that there's no enemy cavalry, the fact that they don't have any Witch Realm Inquisitors to potentially go after. This is a little bit more like it, though. Now that Angmar are moving forward, they're going after them with the Gandalf's Fireworks, with the Hwatcher, one of the two siege equipments that the defenders have today. And this is exactly what the Hwatcher can do. You're not going to do a huge amount of damage to a single target. You're going to do small amounts of damage, but across many, many targets, and this is a perfect situation. It's really good in a field battle, I find, and this is as close to a field battle as you can get while still being a custom settlement siege, and so he's going to be able to do a lot of chip damage here to many of the Angmarim units. The Bjornings are coming forward, and this is immediately going to convince Angmar to try and get back into a defensive shape of some sort. 2 units of Snaga archers, which useful. They could be turned on, the Bjornings, to be honest with you. Meanwhile, very, very fortunate there, those dismounted 4 Nosterrain Knights. They're in a formation that would have potentially devastated that whole unit. Now, though, we also see some... That's a very good pick there. It makes up, really, for the fact that they lost their sheriffs without much. I'm very surprised, honestly, that Kelvin just elected to move his Witchers away from the main body of his army. Maybe he didn't want them getting shot by the Hwatcher, but I would have taken my chances with the Hwatcher far more than allowing them out here in the open without any support when the Bjornings were coming forward, because they are a very serious unit of cavalry. Huge charge bonus, lots and lots of damage. Very few units like them. They're kind of like superpowered wargs. Perhaps the war beasts of Harad are similar in nature. But yeah, good pick there. And worrying for Angmar, because losing the general could have an effect later on when the morale starts to collapse. Loss of the Witches as well is probably his trump card, really, his best tool he could have had, and it's gone already. And they didn't even have to use archers on them. So that's a big win there for the defenders. Heavy Goblin Spears coming across the bridge. You can see there's a bit of damage done. I would imagine that was from the Knights of Anumnus as they came forward. They don't want to come forward again now, though, because with the Heavy Goblin Spears more or less set, they can get into a denser formation if need be. And they are armor-piercing spears as well, so you don't want to be losing high-value knights to very basic Goblin Spears. And that is the benefit of having units like that. You can get what you want out of them relatively easily. And now the Bjornings are going back. Mission complete as far as they're concerned. Hopefully they don't go and run through their own stakes. They're only marching. Okay, good. Yeah, they're just going to filter through the stakes. That could have been a real disaster. The Sheriffs of the Farthings moving in. They may be out of ammunition at this point. and they do charge into the Snaga archers, not doing a great deal of damage. Ranged cavalry tends to have a very low charge bonus. They're a lighter cavalry unit as well, and of course a few of their number have already died. So a lot of them are still holding their pebbles actually and haven't drawn their blades, and yeah, they're going to get cut down now. So I mean, the Bjornings, the loss of the Witchers alone would have been worth all of this, but the Sheriffs of the Farthings really achieved rather little in the grand scheme of things. But I think, you know, overall the Hobbits would definitely have taken the loss of the Witchers and the Angmar in general. Sheriffs of the Farthings ultimately routing the lowest tier of Angmarim units coming forward. A few arrows coming in from the Tookish Hunters, and very basic units of missiles that, so they won't mind too much that they're only going after some Snaga. You can see there as well, bombarding them with their artillery. But this is the problem with this kind of angle. Like I said, if you're shooting down through your own men, you're going to do a ton of damage to your own front line. It's a very fickle thing, the Hwacha, the firework launcher as we'll call it on this occasion. But yeah, it's a problem, because you've got a lot of kills there on the Snaga, routing off a unit of 63, but you really can't afford to be doing that much damage to your front line, even against your most basic units in the Hobbits. He's also got his Farmers of Buckland over here. I mean, they're more useful when they're actually punching above their weight against stronger units, but they will still scythe their way through the Snaga Stalkers here, especially seeing as the Snaga are here unsupported. Their morale is very likely to start to collapse. Now that Angmar are starting to probe the enemy lines, I do think the others need to get their act together as well. The Misty Mountains need to be a little bit quicker than this, honestly. Being a little bit slow. He obviously, Stalin Stepro, retreated backwards in the face of probably the least appealing side of the settlement, because they've got the solid front line that Arthedain have, as well as artillery and all of the trimmings that come with being as Arthedain, like armor-piercing archers, rangers, cavalry, all of that jazz. But you need to move forward eventually, otherwise you're just going to be throwing your ally under the bus, and a unified assault is better. To be fair though, even Angmar themselves don't seem to be fully committed to this assault, because they're only sending forward their lower tier units, and they are ultimately going to fall away without too many problems. Farmers of Buckland will take a few losses because they are a unit with lower survivability. Tookish Hunters firing over this particular hobbit hole into the Snaga, but the Snaga have already taken a lot of damage because of the Hwacha and subsequent volleys that they took on the approach into this position, so this fight is going to go heavily against them. The Tookish Hunters would win in a 1v1 skirmish fight anyway. The Snaga are there, more routing. They're not really achieving too much at this point, Angmar. Yeah, Snaga archers up on the hill. This is a little bit better. This is where you want to be taking up a position as Angmar, because it gives you an even terrain. You don't have to fight uphill. If the defenders aren't going to hold this section of the hill, you can fight them on even terrain if you wish. But again, it's all of the lower quality units. It's a newer player move, this, because I think more experienced players will know you can't afford to just send forward all of your trash without anything of substance to back it up, because you're not going to achieve anything ultimately. Your attacks are going to bounce right off the enemy, even against a lower survivability faction like the Shire. You're just not going to achieve all that much, especially with those clear projectiles coming forward from the Rangers. I mean, I would say actually the Rangers, you don't need to shoot them in here. You're going to win in melee against all of this garbage. There's nothing coming forward of any substance. So you can afford, I think, to allow your Hobbitry and arms to do it. Maybe 1 or 2 units helping to support, but all of your crossbows and rangers do not need to be opening up at this point. And in doing that, actually, you are making this a worthwhile move for the Angmarim. How quickly, my opinion, can turn, depending on what the players do. You can't rely on players doing that, though. Under most circumstances, I'd say that's a bad idea. DUNEDAIN Peacekeepers on the front line now against the Heavy Goblin Spears as Mason Pekern starts to move forward. And yeah, the DUNEDAIN Peacekeepers will rip their way through Heavy Goblin units. It's exactly the kind of foe you want them against. Arthedain Men-at-Arms will as well, albeit in not quite as dominant a fashion. I'm not entirely sure why the frame rate took a nosedive there, but there you go. A little bit surprising here, actually, that Morris kept his front line so static. He allowed these goblins to get into the side of them, actually. Good move there from Mason Pekerns to actually potentially do some good damage there. Now, the Goblin Infantry here routes almost immediately because they took a direct hit from the catapult. They're relatively unsupported and they're going up against a very well-prepared front line. So I think this army over here from Stalin Stepro needs to start pulling its weight fairly substantially, otherwise there could be trouble. Mason has managed to get into the side of the line, but you can see here there's a lot of routing going on. And this ultimately is the problem. Like, there's some decent stuff going on here from the attackers, but they need to support their pushes, their assaults more substantially than this. Yes, you're going to get shot, but that's an inevitability. You're going to get shot by the artillery and all their nastiest archers, but the alternative is this, where your units just keep running away because you're sending too small a force against too elite a force for you to deal with in this way. Happening over here as well. Low quality units that are easily routing, and the Bjornings are over here now as well. So I mean, this is a unit which 123 of them could come back from routing, but not if the Bjornings decide to cut them down on the retreat, and that's well worth your time. What the attackers have in their favour, though, is disposable manpower. This, I would say, is... I don't want to be too harsh on a player which is newer to the game, but this is a move which I would describe as cowardice. What this is you perceiving this front line over here and thinking, I sent my trash at it and it didn't do anything, which is what you would expect to happen. I don't want to go up there anymore because it's too hard. I'm going to go around and allow my allies to take the heat for me and then come in the late game and try and be the hero. It won't work, I don't think, because your allies are going to get pummeled even harder if you do that, because this will allow the Hobbit folk to turn all of their missiles over here, and in the end you're just going to find yourself suffering the same fate. And like I said, the biggest thing about the Shire, you can hit it from every angle, and that's what you need to do. If you narrow the battle map, you're playing into the defender's hands so much, and it's a bad move. But the thing that the attackers do have on their side here is numbers. They can afford to make some mistakes, and if the defenders make just one or two significant errors, that alone will be enough to turn the battle around. So it'll be interesting to see if the Hobbits and the DUNEDAIN are able to keep their organisation and keep their cool. Goblin infantry came back, it's going to rout almost immediately. There's a few javelins coming in from the Snaga skirmishers in behind. I like this, actually. They're not expensive enough to get the attention of some of Arthedain's scarier stuff, but you can't really afford to just ignore them, because they're going to do a decent amount of chip damage over time. Over here, meanwhile, poor Mason Pekern's army, he's getting some decent damage done with his Snaga skirmishers as well, but in melee it's been a real uphill struggle thus far. Quite literally. Dismounted Fornost Orion Knights carving their way through the heavy goblin, which I've always liked the fact that obviously these are the vanilla models for like the goblins of Moria. I like the fact that it's like you can tell that they were basing it a bit on the Balrog with their armour, in as much as the goblins can, showing a bit of creative thinking and reverence for a creature of old. Here come the Knights of Anubis, and this is a problem. These crossbows are in a good position from Stalin Stepper, he's shooting up the lines of Arthedain now. These snow trolls are a little bit scattered, but they are going after the right things as well. They're going after the pikes, so again, if these crossbows can get good value, that'll be very, very good for them. These Knights of Anubis don't really have the room to get up a really devastating charge, which is a bit of a problem. They're very, very tanky, but if they get put into a corner here, which is... they're in danger of doing so. These snow trolls capable of breaking the backs of some horses, most certainly. You can see some damage has been done here, and there is a hole in this line which could be used if they decide to rush forward with some infantry. If it was me, I probably would. I would probably press the attack now and leave it at that, really. There's also some Hobbit folk on the front line, but they're taking a lot of damage here, trying to keep this section of the line up and running. But, I mean, to be fair, the Misty Mountains are making some headway over here now. And it might be that Arthedain have to stop being so picky with stuff like their rangers, and they need to start shooting at something, because the skirmishers for the goblins over here are actually starting to get some decent value. Knights of Anubis still not quite able to get up to charge speed. In this kind of terrain, however, under trees, not really a lot of space, it's quite understandable. Again, too close, you need to get a little bit further away. Reforged is much more forgiving than DAC for that kind of thing, but you still need to give the cavalry and Med 2 a run up. If you're like 2 meters away from the target, that's not enough time to get the momentum you need. So retreating up the hill, taking your time, fewer charges, but charges of higher quality, especially from a unit with 20 charge like the Knights of Anubis, will be much, much better for you in the long run. Morris has still got his units in the very same formation, so he's not deviating where he can, but that may ultimately prove to be a bit of an undoing for him, because elsewhere his line is falling apart. I think he needs to pivot somewhat. But he is now using his rangers on that blob of Mountain Uruk-ho, so that will be enough to do some good damage. Knights of Anumis continuing to be hounded, really, by the Snow Trolls. What's going on over here? The Drake Broodlings going right around the back over here. They're not really going to facilitate all that much, though. The Grey Company trying to chase after the Drake Broodlings, but if the Angmar army was pushing up the hill right now, this could be amazing for the attackers, because the Drake Broodlings coming over here, charging into the back of some of these hobbits, could be exactly the sort of thing that you want to see. I mean, again, big charge on these monsters from the mountains. That is the thing that I would say the defenders probably have working against them. They've been a little bit too rigid in their defensive line. It's almost like they've been too proud of their defensive shape. And when the defenders, or the attackers I should say, elect to go around them, they're like, we're still not going to move. We like our shape. We're going to keep there. And like the time for that is long gone. Like these units honestly should just pull back at this point. There's no danger over here. All of these hobbitry and arms need to get away from here. They need to start sort of forming a bit of a Helm's Deep around the town centre, to be honest with you, because that's the only place where the danger lies now, because of Angmar completely abandoning their assault over here. There is a single cave troll going up against all of these Tookish hunters. He'll probably kill off quite a few of these hobbits wielding short swords, but ultimately I would think eventually the cave troll will probably fall. Damage over a long period of time is a thing. Angmar coming forward like a wrecking ball now. I would hope that this is the case. If you're going to come over here, concentration of force needs to be what you're going to do, because you're going to be narrowing the battlefield for yourself. It does look as though, at the very least, that's what Angmar are going to be doing, sending forward their full might and smashing this front line to smithereens really very, very quickly. The defenders need to form themselves up here, because their front lines are falling apart. They need to reorganise themselves pretty quickly, otherwise this battle will get away from them, as it can very often do for defenders in a situation like this. I have to say, Stalin Stepfrey may have been he may have dragged his heels a little bit in moving forward again after pulling back from the initial artillery onslaught, but since that time he's utilised a lot of his units very well actually. The Drake Broodlings, the Javelins, just the infantry in general, finding those gaps, the Snow Trolls. Very, very good. I think the two Goblin players, despite a few questionable decisions, have done really quite well here actually. They've done the kind of things I would want my allies to be doing. Moving forward, exploiting gaps. Can't ask for more than that. Especially if the defenders are not willing to move their front lines to accommodate. It's very, very easy to take advantage of that sort of thing. And I mean, this is a problem here for the defenders at this point, because they're being forced away from the town centre. The momentum the attackers carry with them at this point is very large. The Bjornings are over here. I mean, stuff like the Rangers and the firework launcher could be devastating here, but if the attackers are swift, they could move right into the front at Bag End here and then not let the town centre go again. And this would be one of those situations where a town centre capture would be completely legit, because it's being actively fought over by both sides. Wards of the North and Arthedain marks. And I wonder what the Wards of the North are actually firing at. Blackwatch Legion? Not the worst target, because they are a concerning entity on the field. Not so much for the damage they can do, but just the fact that when Angmar came across here, the momentum they carried with them was substantial because of the Great Shield infantry that they bring. But I still think Angmar would have been better served going up this way. Hitting them from multiple angles would have allowed you to stretch them more. But having said that, considering the tactics they decided to go for, this is about as well as they could have hoped for it to go. Meanwhile, going through Bilbo's party, stealing all of the foodstuffs, the likes of which the orcs have probably never seen before. Certainly nothing along the lines of that sort of quality. Proudfoot Protectors, they might be more useful for their pikes as this battle goes on at this point. A lot of these skirmishers are getting caught in melee now though, which again speaks well of the attackers. The Gundabad Guard are wavering. If they can stabilise, which they should be able to do, I mean even fighting uphill like this they should have the beating of Arthedain marksmen. And there's a lot of units around I guess, and they are fairly far away from support. There's Black Uruks down here meanwhile in the woods. The Ents are doing their best, but again, they're a little bit stretched at this point, stretched all over the place. To be fair though, they're going after targets they should be able to kill en masse. Snaga skirmishers, heavy goblin crossbows will hate being in melee with the Ents, they'll just be far too strong for them. Goblin King's Bodyguard moving forward. Probably not the sort of unit you want to engage the Ents with either, much higher quality, but the Ents, you run the risk of your general dying if that's the case. Misty Mountain Catapult getting into position, only two of them remain actually, so did one of them get destroyed by counterfire? Nope, one of them was just inside the other almost perfectly. A attacking artillery, though, that could be the sort of thing which makes this an untenable position, really, for the defenders. We shall have to wait and see. If the defenders are going to win this, it will be on the strength of their skirmish power. DUNEDAIN Troll Slayers throwing a couple of javelins in, but the angle means only a section of the unit is actually firing their javelins. But you can see a very effective choice of weapon against the Drake Broodlings. Further down the hill, Black Orcs of the Mountains getting into the rear of this section of the front line, the unmoving section of the front line as it were. They managed to hold for a decent amount of time, killing off a few more Mountain Uruk hosts, but ultimately with the arrival of the Black Uruks, that's going to be the end of Arthedain there, which means they're not going to be able to defend their skirmishers up on this hill, to be honest. They're going to need to move them. The DUNEDAIN Troll Slayers can throw their javelins in and then get into melee and then potentially be that defensive line they need. But all of the missiles are going this way now towards the forest on the hill. Only a single unit of basic Arthedain marksmen are shooting in here. Goblin King's bodyguard are pushing forward. It's a very messy defence at this point, which usually will favour the attackers. But when the defenders are so reliant on their skirmishers, it can be quite difficult to tell which way the battle's going, because keeping track of all these arrows can be very, very tough. Angmar Marauders coming in here, Blackwatch Legion going after the Hobbitry in arms that are on this vegetable patch. And the Hobbits should probably fall by the wayside here because they're a little bit stretched. The Blackwatch Legion, though, are depleted, to say the least. The Grey Company moving backwards. Rangers and Troll Slayers moving across to this hill now. Again, it's the right choice, but the Drake Broodlings are here prowling around menacingly. And they should go into the Rangers, and they do. Very good use of the Drake Broodlings in this battle, I have to say. Just stopping those Rangers from firing for as long as you can will allow you to sort of push in, establish yourself more, and also prepare for maybe trying to get your units into a position where the body piercing isn't quite as lethal. Black Uruks, meanwhile, are pushing forward with some Mountain Uruk hosts, going after the Arthedain marksmen, who have held their own really very well in melee, but I think this might be the end of the line for them, as goblins start to swarm forwards, and now the high ground that overwatches the town centre is going to be claimed by crossbows. Ooh, near enough point-blank fire here by the Watcher, and those White Uruk Fearmongers are getting absolutely hosed. In addition to that, some drummers in the background. I don't know if most of those trolls, I think, were already dead, but some of them, I'm pretty sure, were slain by the firework launcher as well. Those Proudfoot Protectors continuing to utilise their crossbow bolts again on the White Uruk Fearmongers, a worthy target. The White Uruks are a real concern in melee. Angmar Marauders are routing, so again a good volley this from the firework launcher. They're going to need to get at least one more off though as the drummers move forward to try and engage in the melee. Those Broodlings are still being a real menace. They do manage to get another volley off. If those drummers actually, they probably want to, yeah, they actually manage to dodge the point blank fire. So another volley was loosed, and the White Uruk Fearmongers break as a result. So they got what they wanted out of the firework launcher, to be honest. And the drummers are now in behind enemy lines. Banderbrass archers are the ones that are bravely putting their bodies on the line to defend the TC. But fortunately for them, it's only a catapult crew that they're having to face in melee with those knobbed clubs that they have. There's a few Proudfoot Protectors in here as well. 66 of them apparently, which is weird. Where's the rest of that unit? Have they pushed into enemy lines? These Ents are still here. I think they're probably going to start to fizzle out now though. Seems like a few of them are dead, and the Black Uruks are better at dealing with a unit like this. Large units like this, trolls and Ents and the like, shock infantry is, if you have to engage them in melee, then shock infantry is going to be the better way because they can do more damage to them. Which is what you want. You want to be burning through that health of theirs as quickly as possible, because otherwise they're just going to back up. Too many kills. There's a lot of routing going on here, and it may be the attackers are running out of steam here. In spite of some good work from the attackers, I'm not sure. The drummers probably going to kill off the crew, especially with the help of those Gundabad guardsmen. I think with the DUNEDAIN units that are left, I think the defenders are going to be okay here. Wardens of the North, Rangers, Wardens of the North are going to be able to easily slay Mountain Uruk hosts. They're also taking some damage actually from some units across the way. Still 3 Drake Broodlings, and they're still going to charge in, doing what damage they can. I think their time will be, their days will be very much numbered with the Wardens of the North using their long swords on them. Those heavy goblin crossbows have taken a bit of a ravaging, I would assume, from the DUNEDAIN Rangers across the way. Interesting skirmish fight that one is. Actually, no, they're going after the Proudfoots. Interesting prioritisation there. Crossbows are very damaging, but rangers more so. Especially considering the increasing reliance you're going to have on rank and file orcs to swarm the enemy if you are to be successful in this fight. 21 Mountaineer at coast. There is a general in here as well. 12 Goblin King's bodyguard remain, so they've been in the meat grinder here, and not many of them are here. The general is still up though, which the general more important to the Misty Mountains than any other faction in the game really. Shocking morale really when they get put under genuine pressure. Band of Brass Archers, some more Blackwatch Legion arriving on the sea. Armour piercing will be useful against the Blackwatch Legion, but getting a little bit surrounded here. More routing Snarg. It's been a really chaotic fight. Orcs running for the hills every which way you look, but constantly the defenders being slowly inched backwards, and with 99 Black Uruks on the front line, the Wardens of the North will be needed to help hold the town centre. And yeah, with those Dunedain Rangers, that will stop that advance dead in its tracks. The White Uruk Fearmongers look as though they've returned. Those Ents, there's only 2 of them left, but they've nearly mulched their way through the entirety of this Black Uruk unit. Snarga returning, already wavering though, not the sort of unit you can hang your hat on to do any significant damage there. There's still Blackback Mountain Berserkers and Goblin King's bodyguard up here though. I think the time has come to move these lads forward at this point. Hitting the town centre from the other side could be a winning move if Stalin's Stepbro decides to go for it. 2 units of genuine quality, 1 more defensive, 1 very aggressive. I don't know if the defenders could withstand that at this point, honestly. Maybe they could with Troll Slayers if they still had ammunition. But I think it is now or never because, I don't know, on the front line I really don't fancy the chances of the attackers with the Wardens of the North here. Sword to sword, the Black Uruks really don't stand a chance against the finest that the Dunedain have. Your sword arm's going to be strong when you have to draw a steel bow several times a day. Still those Ents over there as well. 2 Cave Troll Drummers. Got some Angmar Marauders going around the back as well. 27 of them. They're getting chased off by the 1 remaining Knight of Illuminas. And there goes the Goblin Generals on the front line. That might facilitate a rout from all of the units that are not the Goblin King's bodyguard. Although, to be fair, Black Uruks of the Mountains are made of slightly sturdier stuff than most other Misty Mountains units. And yeah, to be fair, the only units the Misty Mountains actually have left on the front line are not the sort that are going to just run away immediately at the death of the General. Mountaineer at coast over here. Heavy Goblin crossbows. Do they still have ammo, I wonder? And he is moving forward now, which is good. He's sweeping across the hills. I think one of his units doing this is fine, and I would actually pick the Goblin King's bodyguard to do this, and I'd slam into the back of the TC with the Blackbacks. He might do it the other. He might elect to do it the other way round. Either way is fine. I would just prefer the damage to be in the TC, and for the shielded infantry to be going after the ranged threats. Not that that particularly matters, the shield, when it comes to Troll Slayers. They're going to do hefty damage to you anyway. Still some crossbows with ammo left on this hillside over here as well. At this point, this is the kind of unit which could make a real difference because the margins we're dealing with here are very, very fine. They took the CC for a little bit there with the heavy goblin crossbows that came in, but they're ultimately going to be answered by some rangers, and that's going to be enough to rout them. The morale at this point in time is very, very fragile. That's the downside to playing as such a horde-focused faction like Misty. There's 1 Ent remaining. Oh no, 2 Ents remaining. Yeah, and now I think the window of opportunity perhaps for Stalin Stepbro to use one of his 2 elite units, get into the rear of the town centre, force the defender's hands a little bit, kind of pass by. He elected to do it with heavy goblin crossbows, which were never going to be sufficient, never going to be up to the task. He needed to do it with one of his 2 elite units. And now, more worryingly, the Wardens of the North are... It looks like they're chasing the Snaga. That's not what they're doing, I think. They're going to try and shut down these heavy goblin crossbows, taking out the missiles. It's not liking the defenders' odds here. I would imagine that's because of this blob of units here, which is still a concern. The attackers can absolutely go on to win this fight. The Troll Slayers have taken a lot of damage, and a lot of that must be down to that unit of crossbows. It must be. In come the Ents. Again, I like the choices here because the Blackback Berserkers are going to be able to kill off the Ents very easily at this point because of the damage they've already taken. Just in general, the Blackbacks are going to be one of those units the Ents really do not want to fight. crossbows do break, but the crossbows have already done a lot of damage to the Troll Slayers, which otherwise would have actually been really good against the Goblin King's bodyguard. As it is, though, one of the enemy armies is gone. It's not Stalin's Stepbro, and it might be Mason Kearns. Is there any Angmar units left? I mean, at this point it doesn't matter so much because Stalin's Stepbro is the only one who has a substantial force left. I think it is Mason's army that left. So it is just the one Misty army that remains. Wardens of the North are going to try and form up another force. Gandalf's firework crew, Banderbrass archers, bit of AP. I think they do need to get up the hill. I mean, it's going to be tough this. If these Dunedain Rangers still have a bit of ammo, that could be a game changer. Yeah, those Dunedain Troll Slayers with the support of those crossbows, these Misty Mountains elites have managed to swallow them whole. A unit which otherwise would have been so brutally effective, reduced to this. There's still a cave troll drummer wandering about the field, doing his thing, enthusiastically. What's going on over there? Heavy Goblin crossbows have returned. Definitely the sort of unit you need to get rid of again, because doubtless they still have some ammunition. I mean, the main thing here is the Wardens of the North, and they do rout. Another player admits defeat, so it doesn't really matter either way at this point. Both of this Misty Mountain Army's allies are gone now. Do they still have ammo? They're going to get relentlessly chased. I mean, in terms of sheer melee, Misty have got this. Blackback Berserkers going to be too damaging for anything they have in melee. The Wardens of the North have a numbers disadvantage on them at this point as well, seeing more action. Combine that with 46 Goblin King's bodyguard, and that will be sufficient. But I don't know. There's some Proudfoot Protectors. That's a bit of a game changer as well, because these are pikes. Late game pikes, always so useful. There are better pikes in the game, certainly, but all you need is to hold them at arm's length at this point. Combine them with the Wardens of the North and it might be enough. But it also might be that the Blackbacks are so devastating at carving their way through these units that you just don't have the gumption to win. They do have ammunition, so at the very least, what I think he needs to do here is... It's an interesting conundrum here for the Misty Mountains. He needs to stop those Rangers from firing into him. But I think he also needs a little bit extra on this front line on the TC now. I think he needs both of his units, because if he wraps around with his units here, he could crumple the Proudfoot Protectors. But if he does that, the Rangers are going to shoot into the back of the Blackbacks, and that could be the end. And it could be those Rangers still having ammunition. You know, Misty Mountains have also returned though. What have we got here? I think they're out of ammunition, these heavy Goblin crossbows. The Dunedain Rangers are going to get in the way of them, and they will probably rout pretty quickly, but full of twists and turns this, or I wouldn't do this. The Proudfoot Protectors need to stay on the front line against the Blackbacks, otherwise those Wardens are going to get dusted, really. If I were the Misty Mountains, though, I would take the risk that these Dunedain Rangers don't have much ammunition left. Like 1 or 2 volleys. Because if that's the case, the damage they do would not be sufficient to kill off enough Blackbacks, and you would have a complete surround in the TC. And I'd be willing to take that risk, because I think if you continue to chase around with these Goblin King's bodyguard against the Rangers, I don't think you win. I think the Blackback Berserkers, they get done in by the pikes. Although having said that, again, both sides are doing the best job they can. The Proudfoot Protectors finally fall. What are they going to try and do here? Try and engage the Goblin King's bodyguard? You don't need to do that. I promise you, you do not need to. Well, I mean, at this point, they've actually lured them into a position where they could end up doing what I would have done anyway. Very finely balanced, this, but the more they keep these pikes off the front line, they cannot afford to not have these pikes in melee with the Blackbacks, because the Blackbacks are slowly but surely going to carve their way through here. Unless, of course, it all comes down, I think, to how much ammunition these Rangers truly have. A few volleys and this all changes. The Goblin King's bodyguard are going to go into the front of the pikes as well, which is not desirable, and this could be the moment where things tilt in the defender's favour. This would have been great if the pikes were pointing this way and a rear charge, and you could get in and amongst them and they wouldn't be in formation. They're in formation now though, and it's a worry. This being the case, you need to constantly be pushing forward with them. Victory is almost a certainty. The blackback's taking damage. To be fair, the body-piercing arrows might get a bit of friendly fire as well. Well, well, well. It all comes down to this. 2 Black Arista mounts. I mean, yeah, like everything, anything you can muster at this point to the front might make a difference. The difference between victory and defeat. Those body-piercing arrows are doing just as much, well, not just as much, but some damage to the Wardens of the North as well. And I think the difference being is that, like, the damage done to the blackbacks is more important because of how damaging those hooked swords are. They're more like war picks, really, aren't they? The arrows thudding into them at this point. The numbers are now dead even as well, and when it's dead even like this, even without the range of fire, the Wardens with their higher melee defense might be enough to outlast blackbacks. Because when they had a numbers advantage with that might of theirs, that may have made the difference. Yeah, and I think it's just the, well, there goes the Shire's general, or Samwise, but ultimately it doesn't matter too much because they're in the town centre anyway, so lock morale, they will fight to the bitter end, and that's all they really need to do with their Proudfoot protectors at this point. Second battle in a row that we've had that's in Eriador, and this time around, I mean, the Hillmen were able to win the last one, but I don't believe the Orcs and Goblins are going to be able to replicate that here. Yeah, DUNEDAIN range is out of ammo now, so they're just going to get into melee again, compromising the formation. I think at this point we'll probably go up to ×2 speed, to be honest with you. The Goblin King's bodyguard is still fighting hard, but again, this is the problem. Like, for a long time it's said this, victory was a distinct possibility for the Goblin King's bodyguard, and it still is, but slowly but surely the Proudfoot protectors are getting a really good KD on these guys because of the animation and the reach that pikes have. You can hold units at arm's length. This is what you need to do. You need to push in and not allow them to do that, because then pike formations tend to go a little bit weird in Medieval 2, and you're in and amongst them. Definitely what you need to be doing. Very, very good. Very, very solid. They could win here, the Goblin King's bodyguard, but I don't think it's going to matter too much. But it might. If the blackbacks can kill off enough of the Wardens of the North in particular, only 16 of them remaining. Band of Brass Archers, Rangers. Not completely out of this, the attackers, but I'd be extremely surprised if the Misty Mountains were, able to come out of this engagement victorious. A bloody fight on both sides, though. There is the Arnorian general, resplendent in his armour, fighting alongside, surrounded by hobbits with their clubs, as they continue to try and do the business here against blackbacks. Gotta love the Wardens of the North unit model, the steel bowman. I like the sort of heavier DUNEDAIN aesthetic. It's still lighter. You can still see they make good use of sort of leather and mail so that they can move more easily across great distances. There's also those plates in there. They're ready for battle. Battle Ready DUNEDAIN. That's a name that hasn't been used in a long time, isn't it? Victory seems certain. Only a fool could lose this battle. Azog with his janky hand that kind of bends. Very weird. Very janky unit model indeed. It's slow going when you're dealing with multiple HP units. The Proudfoot protectors are, when pikes get below a certain unit count, to be fair, they will start to die off pretty rapidly. And these Proudfoots, they can only hold the line for a little bit longer. These blackbacks, there's only 2 of them that remain. The Band of Brass Archers have turned around to sort of buy a little bit more time for the DUNEDAIN to finish them off, and then for them to get into the fray. 16 though? Still a lot of these Goblin King bodyguard, Could still go this way. I mean, they can surround the Goblin King's bodyguard at this point, though, if they're paying attention. Instead of just sort of piling into the front of them where they're at their strongest, you could surround them, take away some of their melee defense, do the business that way. Like I said, I think it's going to be a battling performance in the Misty Mountains. I still don't believe they will win. The Goblin King's bodyguard is a very good unit, but it's a very workmanlike unit. It's not the showstopper that I think they need it to be in this kind of situation. They are just piling in from the front, though. the defenders. If they do go on to lose this battle, that will be the reason why. They had the opportunity to surround them there. Even if it was just with the Rangers, it would have made a difference. There's still a Blackback Berserker over here being shanked by a bunch of Tookish Hunters. Stun locked as well. Well, it would be really disappointing for the defenders if they ended up losing this because they didn't surround the Goblin King's bodyguard, if they just panicked and tried to get into melee as quickly as possible. Even the Dunedain Rangers on their own would have been enough to make a big difference in that regard. In comes the one Blackback. Ooh, and he gets slain. And that guy getting slain, yeah, the Goblin King's bodyguard ultimately didn't have quite have the numbers nor the fatigue to see the battle through, but that is an incredibly close call. The defenders could have thrown it away at the end there, but fortunately it wasn't a misdemeanor grave enough to cost them the battle, which I do think they deserve to win overall. I do think the attackers, when they did surge forward, they did cause a lot of problems for them, but ultimately I think the decision making of the attackers in parts, more less so on a micro sense, because I actually think on a smaller scale the attackers did rather well, getting their crossbows into good positions, utilising their trolls, their great shield units. The Drake Broodlings in particular were used very well. In that sense I think they did well, but the macro sense, how they approached the battle overall, I think in particular Angmar deciding to go over here and attack with his allies rather than taking advantage of the vast amount of space that Hobbiton offers you as the attackers. It was basically the attackers electing not to use the biggest advantage that attacking on Hobbiton gives you. But such is the way of things. I mean, I think that is one of the bigger reasons as to why ultimately they're going to come away from this with the L. Still a very enjoyable fight, to be sure. As Azog and his banner carrier are the last ones. Azog is the only one left, and there he goes. Oh, he routes actually. He ran. He's the only one that's going to live, possibly. Yeah, he will get away, I suppose. A very enjoyable fight though, so big thank you to Morris for sending this one in, and a big thank you to all of the players for being a part of this battle. Like I said, I think Angmar's decision to not take advantage of the space was a big deal. Early on as well, there was a few questionable choices. In the mid part of the battle though, the attackers did very well, I think. But late on, you know, the defenders deserve good credit as well for using their skirmishers nicely. And the Dunedain Rangers giving the attackers the run around there at the end was ultimately the difference between victory and defeat. Been a while since we've seen the Shire in action as well, so they are a bit of a meme faction, to be honest. But if there's anywhere that it makes sense to utilise them, it's most certainly here. So I can see why the Drip Merchant picked them. Let's have a little look, however, see what did the damage for Arthedain. So Wardens of the North getting 279 kills. I would say actually that most of their kills probably came at range with their arrows because they were shooting into stuff like the Blackwatch Legion. But I think their most useful contribution was ultimately in melee, because it was by their strength that the defenders were able to have enough in the tank to defend the town centre and ultimately win the battle, just about. Troll Slayers, less impressive actually. Normally you see the Troll Slayers get like over 100 kills with their javelins alone, and then they can sort of top that kill count up with their axes, but they actually didn't do all that well, which is, I suppose it speaks well of the attackers, but also positionally I think the Troll Slayers could have been used a little better. The Rangers, on a map like this where it tends to be a little bit quicker, tends to be less choke pointy as a siege, 267 is a reasonable amount of kills. You're not going to get the 500 plus that you see in sieges that are more choke pointy. The Peacekeepers did decently on the front line, as you would expect against this kind of opposition. His initial front line in places, I have to say, did buckle pretty quickly, and I think he was a little bit too slow to react to that, but in the end it didn't end up costing them the victory overall, but it could have been a factor if they had ended up losing that I would have mentioned more harshly. Arthedain Men-at-Arms dismounted Fornost Orion Knights, more of them here. Catapult, 91 kills is fairly average for a catapult, to be honest with you. You'd expect more if you're going to bring it. Grey Company with 327, so that's the most that he gets, again, utilising them as cavalry, but also for their body-piercing bows. Knights of Venumus did okay as well. The cavalry just here to be an annoyance, get in the way. And then you can see the Arthedain marksman as well. 235 kills on a unit of regular archers. That is a very decent return indeed. So yeah, nice to see Hobbiton again. It's been a little while, and it's always good to revisit the classics, as long as they don't become too ubiquitous. It's nice to see. Speaking of revisiting the classics, I have also got a replay on Osgiliath, which is probably going to be coming up. Maybe also some Silmarillion stuff, depending upon whether the Discord involved wants to send me their replays. I'm not sure, but if they do, then I will most certainly be showing off some of them as well, which is always good. As for other stuff, I mean, it's by the time this replay comes out, we will probably be into, or substantially into, December, maybe even to what would have been the Christmas break, but obviously that's kind of a meaningless distinction, given how things have been going lately. I may or may not have a lot more information at this point, which will allow me to start building towards the January channel update that I've been talking about, because by mid-December I'd imagine that something will have started to take shape. Regardless of what that is, it will be worth keeping an eye on that, because obviously, you know, building towards that the channel update, which I will make in the new year, depending upon how things are going to be progressing, that will have a large bearing on the future of my channel. As it has been, of course, my channel hasn't really been affected by the return to university because of the rather scattered schedule, so it's been really business as usual for the most part, other than perhaps the first week of December, as I mentioned. But yeah, it's a weird one. It's definitely a very changeable situation, to the point where I'm recording this in mid-November. I don't really have a clear idea of what's going to be happening longer term just yet, just in the short term still. But it is worth keeping an eye out for that, because if you do follow my channel regularly, that will be, you know, it will be very useful information. It won't be for about a month after this video, I don't think, but it is worth keeping an eye out just in case it does come sooner, because I might have the information to be able to do it before the new year. But again, it kind of depends. There's a lot of moving parts with regards to that, which I can't really get into too much, so I will stop waffling for now. So yeah, big thank you to Morris once again. Big thank you to all of the players. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.